Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to be taking a look at Game 8 between Magnus Carlsen and Ian Nepo. And if you like content like this and you want to see more of it, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and click on your notification icon. So Carlsen starts out with the move pawn to e4 in this game, and Nepomniachtchi replies with pawn to e5, which has been his preparation for this match. We have knight f3, we have knight f6, we have a Petrov defense, also known as the Russian defense, or the Russian variation. And then we have Magnus Carlsen deviate from his previous games with the move pawn to d4, which is generally referred to as the Steinitz variation. This was a favorite of Paul Morphy and was a favorite of Garry Kasparov. It's also one of my personal favorites from back when I was a younger player because it manages to avoid a lot of opening theory that you run into with the main line with knight takes e5. One of the nice things about pawn to d4 is you basically only have to deal with two possibilities. You have to deal with the possibility of knight takes e4, which was played in the game, and also just the possibility of e takes d4. So you only have to prepare two lines for white, which really cuts down on your theoretical preparation. After e takes d4, the main line is e5, knight e4, queen d4, d5, e takes d6, knight takes d6, and these positions are known to be advantage white. White is up 2 extra tempo in a symmetrical position, and this is generally considered a very good thing, so white tends to do very well from here. So Nepomniachtchi played the most popular continuation, which is knight takes e4, and then there's actually two options here to play for a very slight edge with white. The main option is the one that Magnus Carlsen chose, and this is the one that has the general consensus of being the best way to play for an advantage with white. There is actually a lesser played alternative, which also should lead to slight advantage white. This was my personal favorite when I was younger, but it's also been played by players such as Nigel Short. This move decounters e5, and then after the move, say, pawn to d5, we would simply play knight d2, knight c5, and here white just enjoys a nice, comfortable edge. He's got a little bit more space in the middle, and he's got slightly more development, and really not a whole lot to worry about in the position. The main move here is knight to b3, but it's also possible to just continue with something simple, like, say, bishop e2, castles kingside, and then later you could play knight b3, and these positions should be slight edge white as well. Magnus Carlsen opts for the main consensus of which move gives the best chances for a slight edge. And the basic idea is after d5, white intends to play knight captures e5. The concept being is that the extra move means more to white in this position because he can maintain his post on the e5 square a little bit better than black can. Because having that extra move makes it harder for black to undermine the e5 knight than it does for white to undermine the e4 knight. So, just so that you can understand what I'm talking about, to undermine basically means to either attack directly or attack the base of that knight and force that knight to either move forward and exchange itself, giving white a lot of extra tempo, or to simply move backwards. So, if you're not fully comprehending it, let me try to make it one more. It takes a lot of energy to get a knight to the e4 square. So, like, if you play knight f6, knight e4, it took 2 moves to do that. And if you, say, exchange that knight for, say, a knight that just moved to d2 or a knight that just moved to d3, it only took 1 move of energy to move my knight to d2 or c3, but it took you 3 moves to exchange it. And then the equivalent of that is that you've wasted all that energy because now both pieces are gone. They're off the board. So you spent 3 moves to get rid of a knight, and I spent 1 move to get rid of a knight. That's basically what we're trying to do when we're undermining. So that's why the consensus is this should be slight edge white. So that's just a theoretical thing. So knight d7 was played by Ian Nepomniachtchi. This is widely considered the main move. And here, white has a cute little way that he could end the game right now if he wanted to. He could force a perpetual check with this sacrifice, knight takes f7. And the idea is actually kind of adorable. After king takes f7, what we're going to do is we're going to play queen h5 check. And the point is that we're hitting this d5 pawn, and after we hit the d5 pawn, that e4 knight will be hanging. So that basically makes g6 impossible. So if you don't see it, if we play pawn to g6, we're going to be playing queen takes d5, and that knight on e4 is hanging. We pick that up, and we are up a couple of pawns. So that would be a losing position for black. That leaves black with very few options. If he plays king back to g8, we would play queen d5, and that's mate. So he would have to move his king back to the e file, and after, say, king e7, we would simply play queen e2, and that threatens the move pawn f3, which would be getting our knight back, which would force the king to sidestep to f7, queen h5, we have perpetual. So we could end the game right now with knight f7. Obviously, Magnus didn't want to do that, so he just played knight takes d7. And then we have Ian Nepomniachtchi respond with bishop d7. And now Magnus introduces a pretty clever idea. The main line here is to actually just play castle's kingside. And then after black plays another move, white typically plays the move knight to c3. Now, why this move that Magnus played is clever is because if you're going to play knight d2, you need to do it now. And it's actually kind of nuanced, because when we play a move like knight d2, we're trying to get black to take it, so that we can have that previously discussed black spending a lot of energy to take a piece, and we're only spending one move to recapture. That's what we want. So why can't we castle and then play knight d2? So like if we castle, and then after bishop d6 we try something like knight d2, black is not obligated to take this knight at all. If black wants to, black can simply castle, and then after knight takes e4, d takes e4, bishop takes e4, black has the cute little in-between move, bishop h2, king h2, queen h4, king g1, and then queen takes e4. Would probably be equal, but I would say maybe even just slight edge black. And that's why Magnus Carlsen's move is kind of clever, but it's also something to note that in these positions, it's actually really, really important to remember that symmetrical positions are sometimes very complicated. There can be little tiny details within symmetrical positions, and small things that can go wrong in symmetrical positions can make huge differences. Symmetrical positions are not always drawish in nature, and they don't always just favor the person that's up an extra tempo. So when Magnus played knight d2, he understood that he needed to play it now and not one tempo later. Having that extra tempo of castling and then playing knight d2 actually wasn't desirable. And that's one of the tricky things about symmetrical positions. Sometimes having that extra move, if it's not a move that we want, is a move that we need to avoid. So after knight d2, it kind of forced the move knight takes d2, and then Magnus replied with bishop d2, and then Nepomniachtchi played bishop to d6, and Carlsen castled. And this is another clever situation. The position looks completely symmetrical, but Carlsen is actually threatening to play queen h5 in this position. He's, of course, also threatening to play rook e1 and keep the black king in the middle. So black would like to castle in this position and fix his position, but if he were to castle right here, we would see this immediate queen h5, which puts pressure on the h7 square and also puts pressure on the d5 square. And this doesn't just make black cover the h7 square, it makes him cover h7 in a really uncomfortable way. He would have to cover the h7 square by blocking it with the move pawn to f5, which would create a very bad bishop on the d7 square. So Magnus would probably continue with something like, say, bishop g5, queen e8, queen f3, queen f7, bishop f4. He would trade off his bad bishop and leave black with this bad bishop versus his good bishop, and he would just have an advantage for the rest of the game, and he would torture Ian Nepomniachtchi kind of indefinitely from that point. So Nepomniachtchi recognized that, recognized this issue, and he played kind of a clever move. He played pawn to h5 to prevent it. And then Magnus, I think his next move was pure genius, in the sense that it's not the best move on the board. He didn't play the absolute tippy-top best move, in my opinion. But the genius behind this move was, I think, he correctly gauged his opponent's mental state. I think Nepomniachtchi, after drawing the last game and trying to get himself back psychologically after a loss, I think Nepomniachtchi was not in the mood to draw another game. Nepomniachtchi was in the mood to win. And so Magnus Carlsen's next move practically comes with a draw offer. Magnus Carlsen plays the move queen e1. But I think that he correctly assumed that Nepomniachtchi did not want to draw. Because what's really interesting here is if Nepomniachtchi wants to draw after queen e7, I would dare say that black is a little bit better. And that's another thing about symmetrical positions. You would think that since white has the extra tempo, that no matter what happens, white's going to be better because white has the extra tempo. And again, this is not always the case in symmetrical positions. Sometimes we have extra tempo that we don't want. So in this case, after an exchange of queens, this king coming to the center is actually okay for black. I mean, normally it's not in these types of situations. There's more than enough material to create threats against the king. But in this case, Black has it all under wraps. He has the diagonals covered, and this pawn being on h5 is actually very, very useful in preventing any type of pawn storm that could hit this king. So basically, Black would have this amazing opportunity to activate his king to the f6 square, and then try to trade off some pieces. He could play bishop f5, and then after, say, bishop g5, king g6, White wouldn't have anything better than bishop f5, king f5, and then say we'll have bishop e7, rook h e8, bishop d6, c d6, and White doesn't have enough material left to make any threats against the Black king. The e5 square is clearly covered. The Black rooks are on open files contesting the White rooks, and the king on f5 is relatively safe. White doesn't have the ability to play f3 and g4. This position would likely be equal, but if anybody's better, it's probably Black here. Black probably has a very slight edge in this position. But Nepomniachtchi didn't want this. And the reason Nepomniachtchi didn't want this is he just didn't want another draw. Nepomniachtchi felt like he could play for a win with the Black pieces in the position that he had, and quite frankly, he just wasn't being very objective about it. So what Nepomniachtchi did instead was he went ahead, and after queen e1 check, he shuffled his king to f8. And this is a blatant attempt to play for a win. It's clear that what he's trying to do is he's trying to play like queen h4 and use this bishop and have this bishop and queen be used together, but Magnus shuts that down with his next move really easily. He plays the move bishop to b4. And when he plays this move, that basically takes this dark squared bishop out of the equation, and it asks this really simple question. It asks, how are you going to activate your king side? How are you going to get your rook out? How are you going to finish your development on the king side? And of course, how are you going to coordinate an attack if you don't have a dark squared bishop? The whole plan was to bring this queen to h4 and coordinate some type of attack, but without a dark squared bishop, you simply can't do that. So now we have queen e7, we have bishop takes d6, we have queen takes d6, and then we have simply queen d2, rook e1, rook e1, and the question remains, how do these pieces activate? So Nepomniachtchi tries to activate his rook. He tries to play rook h6 and rook e6, and if he manages to get his rook to e6, he could equalize. But of course, he could have equalized earlier by simply playing queen e7 and exchanging queens. But now Magnus Carlsen is the one playing for a win, and he says, I don't want to let you equalize. I'm going to play the move queen g5. That puts pressure on the h5 pawn, and it makes it impossible for Nepomniachtchi to play the move rook to e6, because Magnus Carlsen will simply exchange and snap a free pawn. So Nepomniachtchi has to come up with a move. So now he plays the move pawn to c6. And now Magnus Carlsen, he takes full advantage of the fact that that pawn is now on c6, and he exchanges a pair of rooks and puts a rook on the open c-file. And the reason this works is because he's taking advantage of the fact that this bishop can no longer hop over this pawn and go to b5. So after he takes control of the e-file, he simply owns this e-file. Because now Nepomniachtchi can't play a move like rook to e6, because we would simply exchange and snap the pawn on h5 without having to worry about queen e1 check, because we can simply block, knowing full well that bishops do not hop over pawns, because this is chess and not checkers. So after rook e1, White has the only open file on the board, and he has a slight advantage because he has a good bishop and open file versus a bad bishop, and it's not clear how this rook is ever getting into the game. So then we have queen f6, queen e3, we have bishop d7, and then we have a very good move from Magnus Carlsen. This is what we teach club players, and this is what we teach beginners. Before you conduct an attack in the middle of the board, go ahead and safeguard your back rank. Give yourself what we call luft. This is basically giving yourself breathing room so that your back rank is not weak, and you're not ever going to have to worry about a bunch of exchanges happening or anything going wrong on the back rank where something sneaks in and you have checkmate. So Magnus spends this time to make this luft move, and Nepomniachtchi doesn't have a good move in response, so he just plays h4 and says, okay, if you're going to make luft, I'm going to create this possibility of a future bind. But in the end, making luft and freeing up your entire back rank from the threat of back rank checkmate is just a little bit more valuable of a waiting move than making some long-term bind possibility. So now Magnus starts operations in the middle of the board. He plays pawn to c4. Nepomniachtchi captures. Magnus captures. And honestly, the position is still fairly close to equal. If Nepomniachtchi plays reasonable chess from this point on, he should be okay. But it appears that Nepomniachtchi just completely lost all objectivity and thought he was still somehow playing for a win in this position. even though really the most he can hope for is just to play some nice solid moves and play for some sort of draw. He should just shuffle his king to safety and just try to play against this isolated pawn long term and just play solid moves. White has an advantage here. White has a better bishop, he has the open file, he has the better pieces. Instead, he goes completely mad and he plays this move pawn to b5, which is just something that we don't do in positions like this unless we have some very specific idea in mind. And I don't think he did. He's basically just creating a bunch of weaknesses right now. He's creating a weakness on c6, on b5, and of course the a7 pawn is hanging and was hanging a move ago. So, I mean, this is really strange. This move is just a blunder. I mean, b5 is just a blunder. This bishop is worse. There's more weaknesses in the position than there was a move ago. And Magnus just immediately pounces. He plays the move queen to a3 check, pouncing on that pawn on a7. So the only thing I can think is that maybe some sort of miscalculation happened here. For whatever reason, after rook e8, he might have thought, after king g8, he might have thought it wasn't possible for Magnus to simply take this pawn, which Magnus immediately did. He might have been thinking that he had something like bishop h3, which would save him. But after rook e8, king h7, and then say queen takes f7, which I'm thinking is maybe the move that Nepomniachtchi missed, White is just clearly better. So Nepomniachtchi, he didn't really even put up that much of a fight after queen takes a7. I mean, maybe he realized that he'd missed his idea. Maybe he was intending bishop h3 and realized that he'd somehow missed queen f7. And he just replied with queen d8. You certainly don't sacrifice a pawn and then retreat and hope that things are going to go well. So after queen to d8, Magnus just pulls his bishop back and says, I'm up a pawn, what are you going to do? And Nepomniachtchi doesn't come up with the adequate response. He plays rook d6, and then we just have rook e4, going after more weaknesses, but also just overprotecting our pawn on d4. And then we have bishop e6, rook e6, rook e6, fe6, and queen c5. And okay, black's position is hopeless. I mean, just completely hopeless. I mean, maybe a computer could hold this with the black pieces. I don't know. But every single pawn in black's camp is pretty much weak at this point. All of these pawns are on squares where white can snap them up with a queen. And, of course, white's king is relatively safe. We've even got Luft. So it's just a question of snapping up a couple pawns and making sure that perpetual check doesn't happen. And white is going to be completely winning. And, unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. So we had queen a5, queen c6, queen e1 check, going for some kind of perpetual, but Magnus just being on top of it, following all the basic rules that you're supposed to follow in these types of positions, just centralizing his queen, grabbing a whole bunch of pawns, bringing his queen back to that central position, blocking off all of the counter checks. I'm sure at this point Nepomniachtchi already wanted to resign. He just felt like he needed to make a few more moves just to kind of put up a show. So, I mean, queen b2, we have queen back, and then eventually Carlsen finds the winning maneuver with queen d1, with the idea of just pushing this pawn through, and after h3 and then queen f3, finishing off the position, because at this point, black has nothing. All the pawns are gone, and that's pretty much game over. Ian Nepomniachtchi finally had his opportunity to resign, and that ended the game. So what can we say about this game? Well, it looked like this was kind of Nepomniachtchi just trying way too hard to win with the black pieces, and it seems like he just completely lost all objectivity. He had many opportunities to get an easy draw, especially early on, and that's exactly what he should have done. So, I mean, that's really all I can say about this game, and this brings Magnus Carlsen to +2 for the match, and Ian Nepomniachtchi is in apparently a very tough psychological spot. He needs to start regaining his objectivity and playing solid chess again. Otherwise, this match is going to turn into a rout, especially if he keeps playing chess like this. So anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess, and thank you very much for watching.